Hey, how's it going, guys? In this video, we're going to look a little bit more at the situation when we face a flop bet after we've already checked as a pre-flop raiser. So we've talked about this a little bit in the other videos about facing flop c-bet, and we've talked about some of the intuitions that are going to be important. But I decided it might be good to take a little bit of a closer look, just because this is such a unique situation. Well, some of the factors we want to be thinking about are the strength of villains range. So when you're under the gun versus under the gun one flat, it's a little bit different versus, say a cutoff button. So that, the villain's going to have much stronger range. And so that's going to lead to different types of bets and checks and continuations. The other thing you want to think about is villain stab frequency. So, there's the type of people who will just bet with whatever if you check to them. And those people you're just going to want to check to a lot more. And, just strengthen your checking range a bunch and just bet carefully. Maybe a little more polarized, just your really strong hands and a bunch of like bluffs that don't really want to check call. That's you're gonna face a lot more of these types of people when you play softer tournaments. People who don't really know how to structure their ranges and might just bet like hands like sevens on king 9-9 when you check to them because they just they don't know what else to do. So those types of people you're definitely gonna want to start checking some of your lower end value bets and then just like bluffing a few more hands that maybe you were considering check folding or whatever. Hand playability across runouts matters quite a bit as well. So we've talked about this a bunch. Having a 5-outer versus having a 2-outer. You start check calling some flush draws because they're better to continue turns with. These things you're still going to consider as a pre-flop raiser. But it's gonna be even more important that you just like really pay attention to that kind of stuff, because if you start check calling just like pocket threes on whatever board because it's a pair, lol, that's not going to serve you too well, especially in these out of position spots where people are going to have stronger ranges because they weren't just defending the big blind because they had a good price or whatever. Let's look at one example. So here I open tens from early, the cutoff flatted, and comes king 9-9. So structuring our ranges here versus a decent villain, I think, is pretty interesting. So we can bet, say, king queen plus, and then just bet some of these low straight draws. And then, we're betting some 9x, but also checking some 9x just so we have some protection. We always want to have a few hands in every range just so we're not like massively overwhelmed versus anyone good in certain spots. So if we always bet all our 9x on the flop and someone knew that, they could just start overbetting right from the flop and really put us in a tough spot with our mediocre king x. For the other hands we want to bet, I think the ace side with backdoor flush draws is very reasonable. You could make an argument for checking some of these, but this is just an example. I think 8-7 with 3 to straight makes a lot of sense. And then these other hands were check folding. In terms of what pair you want to start check calling around, there's an argument that 8-7-6s, because they're at risk of being counterfeit even versus villains bluffs, don't play well. You can definitely fold them. I think I just put them as calls because, versus some people, I think they're fine to call versus others, if they're going to barrel a lot, especially, it's not so good. One thing that's nice is it does give you some bluffs on some rounds when you're check calling, and, counterfeit, you get counterfeit or whatever. So that's all. It's also reasonable to, have that. It's just a little bonus, I guess. One thing you'll notice is that we did check call one of our gut shots, which is queen jack. So I think with the straight draws in a lot, or just draws in general, it's nice to sort of split them up where you have some in both ranges. So with the flush draws, you notice that we generally sort of check our best flush draws and either bet or check raise our lower ones. And I think the same thing can go for our straight draws where we bet the lower ones and then check call the bit better ones. So a hand like queen jack would be nice to check call. I think you could also just do pure randomization. Like if you think someone knows your strategy of doing this and will make some sick exploits because they know you always check your better draws and don't have the lower ones, and so if they have a certain card, it matters. You could always just do pure randomization. That's a little more complex. Just something to throw out there. I think that's reasonable as well. But I think the easiest way you want to start off with is just check some of your best draws just so you have some straight draws in all ranges, and flush draws as well. It's just nice. I think people you it's nice to have some bluffs when it goes bet they bet the flop and it goes check check on the turn. It's nice to just make some disguised straights and stuff because like a lot of people will just assume that you can never have a straight draw or flush draw if you check the flop as the pre-flop raiser, and it's really nice to just like massively punish them with check raises and stuff later that because they're just like making assumptions because they assume you're kind of play like how everyone else plays, but because we're trying to play as good as possible, we're gonna have some nice little hands in our ranges that a lot of people don't have. Versus a stabby villain, just this is just to show a little bit how I would start maybe checking some more of my king X. So if the guy's just gonna bet with like sixes or whatever that was gonna fold to a flop c bet, then like betting ace king doesn't really make too much sense. You could even make an argument for just checking 100 versus someone who stabs way too much. Then I sort of did like the in between case where I'm betting polarized with betting some of my 9x and some draws. The reason I chose 9x as my bet versus having versus checking them is just because with our bluffs we want to be able to barrel, and having these 9x that can barrel across any street is nice just for a little bit of balance. If, even though we want this guy to be betting a lot, some of our draws kind of just prefer to bet and hopefully just take it down. But we're being a little exploitive and checking our king X that we weren't doing in the previous situation. So here, this is a common situation that you're gonna face a lot, which is the three-way spot, which is you open, someone flats, and the big blind overcalls. Especially as people have gotten a little bit better, there's a lot more big blind defense these days. So it's something you're gonna have to consider where you're sort of middle to act after the big blind checks, and it's interesting spot to construct your ranges. First, let's do this example just heads up so we can see how it varies when it's just heads up versus the under the gun guy versus a three-way spot. So, the types of hands we're betting are ace queen plus, and then we're gonna bet some of our straight draws, and then we're also like king 10 and jack 10, and then we're splitting with our king jacks, and then or sorry, checking our king jacks, and then we are gonna bet with our ace highs that have a flush draw, low ace highs that have a flush draw and a backdoor flush draw. And then, we're checking a bunch with these other hands. I think ace king, it's fine to check call it all the time. It's also fine to, bet sometimes with the ace of spades. I think that can really go any way. I don't mind either one. I think if I was playing versus someone very good, I might bet with only the ace of spades and only check call with, say, the flush draw or the backdoor flush draw. But I think versus a lot of people, you can sort of get away with check calling this all the time, as they're gonna just stab way too much. Like a lot of people just bet like jacks and tens and stuff when it checks to them here, and I think you want to check call ace king versus those types of hands just because you have six outs, and then they have a lot of bluffs as well that you have, you're either ahead of or have good equity versus. The rest of these, check calls, I think pretty standard. We're check calling any seven, we're check calling any nine. Pretty overall reasonable situation. So when it becomes a three-way spot, we're definitely way tighter on our betting. Even once the big blind calls, like we're not gonna bet our ace high just backdoor flush draw. It's tougher to get through two people. So I think the ace highs we only want to bet are our ace. The only ones we want to bet are the ones with a flush draw. We're gonna check fold a seven, even if the big blind folds to the bet. I think when the gun to the gun two guy has to bet, he has to consider that there's two people he has to get through now, and he's going to bet a little bit tighter in the spot in general. So I think it's okay to fold some of our worst 9x and all of our 7x. So you notice how we're folding jack 9 and 10 9. I mean, again, if the guy stabs way too much, you can definitely throw these in his calls. But as a default versus anyone who's playing all right in the three-way spot, I think folding a 9x, our worst 9x is totally fine. I would definitely, calling some 9x is nice, and I would just use that by calling our best ones. Here we're definitely only calling our ace king that has the flush draw, or the backdoor flush draw. I think ace king we would have bet just with the ace of spades. Otherwise, we're just going to check fold. King jack, I think again we could bet, could check. I think check calling is fine because we're drawing to the stone nuts, which is nice. King 10 and jack 10, I'm betting here, but I think jack 10 definitely bet. King 10 you could go either way with a check call or a bet in three-way spot. I think I lean towards bet just because you don't get sort of squeezed out of the pot when it goes bet and the big blind calls with a bad hand and you kind of have to check fold. But yeah, overall, I think this is pretty reasonable. It just shows you like you have to play a little bit tighter. Like we're not calling our 7 or 9x. So if now the guy bets and the big blind calls, I think I would fold every 9x now. I don't think these hands are gonna do too well on most runouts. Like with the flush draw there, it's just very tough for you to be good by the river, even if it checks through on the turn. I think I think we just gotta start. We gotta check fold a bunch more. We're still betting pretty tight, so it just shows you as people are entering the pot, we have to play much tighter. Like if say it went like four ways or something, and like two people called, like folding a queen is totally reasonable. It's just it can get to the very extreme situations, but for now that's how I would play it. This is kind of an interesting example. So I open with a lot of chips and Pafshen flats off of I think 23, 24 blinds, and the big blind overcalls with like 10 blinds. This is a very interesting board texture. So given what I think his flatting range is in the 20 to 25 big blind range, I think it's generally going to be broadways, aces, maybe some eights and some sevens, but generally, nines plus he's gonna have shoved pre-flop. So it's like his range interacts with this board very, very well. There might be like the random suited connector or like the sevens or something, but even those, there's just not very many. So like he hits his board so much that I think it's tough to make a betting range really. I I mean, you could make one. Like when I first was looking at the spot, I was like, okay, let me like try to make a betting range. And there was just so few hands that I really wanted to bet, and it really messed up my other ranges. So I was thinking, like, I just think this is a spot where it's probably best to check 100. These spots don't come up too often as a pre-flop raiser, but versus like a short stack on this type of board texture, and there's also the big blind who really like protects him as well. So you can't like overly see that. You have to get through two people. I think that it's probably better to just check 100. So the way we want to do it from here is we're gonna check shove all our flush draws, and then we're gonna protect those by check shoving ace king, some sets queens and fives, and these ace jack suited that's shoving is like the ace jack of diamonds, obviously, and then these other hands are gonna all check call. So kings is in there as a check call. All these like king X is in there as a check call. Queen X is in a check call. It's just like a very tough spot. I think a hand like 8-7 of diamonds doesn't want to bet and get shoved on and then have to call off versus path 10. So I think it's better to just check and then check shove hopefully versus his jack 10, ace 10, his 10-9 of hearts types hands. If he's gonna have a better hand than us, we were gonna get it in if we bet anyway, so it's fine. We're just hoping to get a bet from some hands that maybe would have folded, and we still have equity, and we're well protected with all our best hands. So there's gonna be a lot of check folding on this flop. I think it's a big chunk of our range is check folding here. It's kind of interesting if you're in path 10 spot to maybe start flatting a little bit wider, just because on some certain board textures you just get to win the pot so much. Like anything like this, any two Broadway board basically is your pot the vast majority of the time. So that's just something interesting to think about. Like flatting like a 9-8 suited or 8-7 suited in a spot is non-standard for most people. But when you get to win the board on more textures than just, when you hit, it's pretty interesting to, have some of those looser flats in there. Let's look at an example from late position versus late position. So here we open king jack off, button called, and the big one didn't defend, so it's 10-8-6. And I think this is a pretty interesting board. So for value bets, I did kings plus and decided to check call queens and jacks. I think that's okay. You can make an argument you want to maybe even check call all these over pairs. That's totally fine. Like especially the aces and kings don't need too much protection, so it's kind of nice to sometimes just throw them in as a check call. But because there's so many gut shots I wanted to bet, like these 9x and 7x, I decided to bet aces and kings as well to go with our sets and two pairs and straights. And you can see our best straight draw again. We're check calling, which is Queen Jack here. So you can see this is sort of a common theme that we're trying to emphasize is bet some of our worst draws and then our best ones check call them. I think for overcard check calling, I decided just like randomize with Ace King suited with with the backdoor flush draw, and then just half of our Ace Kings. But I mean, you could do this any way you wanted. Like if you want to like have some because of Queen Jack and Queens and Jacks, you're gonna be well protected on a Queen or a Jack. So that's why I chose Ace King over them. If you're gonna change the way you play these hands, then maybe you want to have some Ace Queen or King Queens in your check call range just to have some overcard protection. That's just totally up to you. So the way you want to choose your hands is really is how the rest of your range is interacting. Even some of these 9x like ace 9 I think is fine to check call and then only bet your worst 9x. It's just totally up to you. I think in general I think just betting and just starting to bluff is always a good strategy, so that's what I'm going for here. But if you wanted to say that, oh, I'd like to check call some of these draws, I definitely see the argument for it. And there's again just a lot of check folding with these junkier hands, like calling ace 5 suited even with a backdoor flush draw is just not very good in this spot, even versus a loose range. Okay, so here's one where the button called and the big blind defended. And so let's do the spot like if we were just heads up. And if we were heads up, I think that, uh check calling with our ace 10 and ace queen is totally reasonable. And for value, we're just gonna go with like aces and ace king plus. I think you could even make an argument for checking ace king if you wanted, but in heads up I would probably just c bet. I think three ways there's more of an argument, but let's say we're heads up, and then we're check calling all these bad kings and all these bad jacks. The ace x we're gonna c bet are the ones with the flush draw or backdoor flush draw. Same with the queen x, back the flush draw and backdoor flush draw. These lower hands we're only gonna bet if we have the flush draw. I don't think they're quite strong enough to bet with just the stone backdoor flush draw. We're betting some of these gut shots, and again, you can see the best draws, the ones that have a little more showdown value, like ace 10, ace queen. We're just gonna go ahead and check call. When the big blind is in the hand as well, we're definitely gonna bet even tighter. You see now the queen x we're only betting when we had the flush draw. Same with the ace x. So if it goes bet, we're obviously folding. We're not gonna peel with queen high backdoor flush draw or anything like that. Our value range is generally the same. Again, I told you, you guys could make an argument for checking ace king if it's a three-way spot. That's totally fine. The rest of these hands are just like all pretty much the same. With the big blind folds, like I'm still peeling every jack x. The big difference would be if the big blind also calls, then I would definitely fold some of our worst jack x. I think maybe it's okay to call like a couple of these jack 10s or jack 9s, but like queen jack ace jack I would still overcall. But it's definitely not a great spot. You're it's like the same as the 9x spot earlier, where I'm calling the best ones and then folding these lower ones. Where that stops off is often going to be dependent on the sizing and how much the big blind peels. So if he's the type of guy who doesn't like to fold the flop a lot, you can definitely call some more jack x. If he's playing a little bit tighter from the big blind, it's definitely reasonable to play a little bit tighter. Same thing with the buttons. Stabbing frequency is going to matter as well. So the more he just sort of bets with whatever, the more you can still overcall a jack x. If he's betting fairly tight and the big blind is playing normal as well, then I think folding a jack x is totally reasonable. But still try to call at least a couple jack x. It's nice just to not only have king x and some flush draws or whatever on the board. So I think I think hopefully that just gave you some good intuitions, because there's a lot of like complex spots once you're the preflop raiser and decide to check, and the way you want to bet or check is often dependent on what positions people are, and there's definitely some argument to play a little bit tighter with some of your value bets if it starts going multi-way. So I think you just have to be pretty careful. Always just have some draws in your check calling range, so you're not just overly pair heavy. And I think if you start doing that, if you start having some of your best routes as check calls, not only will it give you some bluffs on a check check turn, it'll just like protect you on a variety of runouts. So hopefully I gave you some idea of how to change your check calling range as the preflop raiser, so you're not just top pair middle pair heavy, which is pretty standard. But and there's a lot of good reasons to have those hands in there, but it's important to have some other hands in there so you're not just overly obvious with what types of hands you have. So that was a video on facing a flop bet as a pre-flop raiser. I'll talk to you guys soon.